Hey everybody, hope you've had a nice week and are looking forward to a semi-relaxing weekend that also allows you a little time for study. Uh, every now and then I like to post a lecture that includes some oral narration, seems to add a additional kind of human element to the course, and to this point students have mostly enjoyed it. I'd appreciate any feedback that y'all would like to share via email or in the discussion format for the week. So what we'll be discussing this week is an area that many people think of when they think about what goes on in a vocational evaluation, and that's aptitudes and achievement testing. We'll also review preferred learning styles, and then we'll discuss specific aptitudes and achievement tests that are commonly used in vocational. The primary purpose of a work evaluation is helping clients understand their strengths and their weaknesses as they relate to work. As you all know, the demands of work often include skills related to reading, writing, perceptual abilities, and the capacity to follow and understand directions. Does the client have these skills or abilities, or have the capacity to acquire them? That's the difference between abilities, having the skills, and aptitudes, the capacity to acquire them. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, but it is more difficult to measure aptitudes, so we infer people's aptitudes or potential to learn abilities from the results of aptitude tests. There are many aptitudes that can be assessed. And as we've discussed in the course up to this point, it's up to the evaluator, to the counselor, to determine the most appropriate assessment to use in any given situation. Achievement tests are designed to evaluate specific information that individuals have learned through education and experience. Now, this can relate to mental or physical abilities, and it can reflect native skills and or acquired knowledge. In vocational evaluation settings, the most common types of achievement tests that you'll see focus on math and language skills. Now, shifting to learning style, as you probably know, everyone learns best in their own individualized way. Therefore, it's helpful to know how people learn best when making recommendations for future education and training. Evaluating a client's preferred learning style can help with adaptation to training and employment demands down the road. One way to get key information related to preferred learning styles is to just ask clients, how do you prefer to be given instructions to a new assignment? Do you prefer them in writing? Do you prefer to have instructions verbally? Do you do best with a demonstration? Perhaps some combination of all of these routes might be best for you. Now, we can think about learning styles or preferences in a variety of different ways. Some people learn best by seeing. Visual learners aren't going to do as well if they're simply told how to do something. It's not going to necessarily sink in. They actually need to see it being done. I'm this way myself to some extent, to be sure. Auditory learners, as would make sense by the name, learn best by hearing. Folks who are auditory learners can listen to a lecture, process the information, and remember the content fairly well. They can easily recall what they've heard and can reinforce their learning by saying or repeating to themselves what they have just learned, or by listening to tapes of lectures or creating tapes of lectures in their own words and listening to the tapes maybe while driving or relaxing. Tactile learners are going to learn best in workshops or learning labs by actually doing. When we talk about tactile learners, we're talking about hands-on learners. So, as I mentioned, there are a lot of different learning styles inventories out there. One of them is at the other end of this link, the learning styles inventory. Doesn't take long to finish, and it's actually kind of fun to run through. So why don't you take a second, maybe at the end of the lecture you can come back to this slide and run through it, or you can stop and do it right now and look at the results and see what you think about what it has to say. Another key way that we can help people identify information relating to their learning styles is through completing an evaluative interview. One of the best and most common ways to explore consumers' learning styles is just by asking them questions about their preferred method of learning. You might ask them, what's been your most enjoyable learning experience? What techniques have helped you learn in the past? Do you need any accommodations to help you perform better when you're trying to learn new material or content? Questions can be asked in a one-on-one interview as you're meeting with a consumer in a vocational setting. Shifting to achievement tests, the first one that I'll go over very briefly is called the RAT, or the Wide Range Achievement Test. I'm going to bet that many of you are familiar with the RAT. It's frequently used in all different kinds of settings. It's adapted for children and adults. It's a brief instrument, and it's actually got some fairly solid psychometric properties. It evaluates reading, math, and spelling skills, and only takes, as I said, it's brief, 15 to 30 minutes to administer. It can provide suggestions for appropriate training options based on individuals' abilities. For example, if you think about a 50-year-old worker who's been successfully providing for his family or her family through manual labor through most of their life, and now this person has become injured. On the surface, it might not look like he can go back to his prior job, and it also doesn't appear likely that he's going to be able to make the kind of money that he's been making previously. This person's been out of school for 30 years, hasn't taken any kind of academic achievement test in decades, and now you're telling him to sit down and take what he may see as a silly test that focuses on potentially what may be weaknesses for him. It wouldn't be surprising to see his frustration boil over in potentially inappropriate ways. And it's not a personal reaction to you as the evaluator, and this is important to remember. We need to understand that that the responsibility to diffuse these types of situation really falls on us, and that we may encounter situations in which consumers aren't happy to be completing evaluations. Another achievement test is called the Adult Basic Learning Examination. You may have heard it called the ABLE before. And this test is going to be more appropriate for clients who have not completed a formal 8th grade education. You can use it as an aid in developing educational plans. What academic skills does this client currently possess in terms of vocabulary, reading, spelling, computation, and problem solving? The ABLE is specifically designed to be used in conjunction with adult education classes or job training programs. Another test that's widely used that I am going to bet some of you may have heard of, and certainly was used in my setting at the VA quite frequently, is the GATB, or the General Aptitude Test Battery. It's been used by state and employment agencies, and as I mentioned, referring to my VA experience, it has most frequently been used in government type settings. In fact, it was developed by the U.S. Employment Service and has been used since 1947. It measures 9 distinct aptitudes using 12 separate scales, 8 paper and pencil scales, and then I believe 4 verbal scales. Evaluator needs to be specially certified to administer the GATB. So for most of us, what the way that we'll encounter the GATB is going to be in interpreting results or receiving results from contracted evaluators. So for example, at the VA, we had contracts with certain private providers who specialized in specific types of evaluations. They'd administer the evaluations and then provide us with results. I probably don't need to read through all of these for you all, but you can review them. These are the domains, the subtests for the GATB: intelligence, verbal, numerical, spatial, form perception, clerical perception, motor coordination, finger dexterity, manual dexterity, eye-hand foot coordination, and color discrimination. And then here's an example of the types of items that are part of the battery of the GATB. So another aptitude test, and this is one that I'm not as familiar with, is the DAT, or the DAT. The reason I'm not as familiar with it, at least as a clinician, is because it is geared towards younger individuals. It's set up in two different formats. A level 1 format, which is for grades 7 through 9, individuals in grades 7 through 9, and then a level 2 format for individuals in grades 10 through 12. Now you'll see, looking at the second bullet point, that the content areas are fairly similar to the content areas in the instrument we discussed on the previous slide. Now, here is an instrument that, again, I think some of y'all will probably be familiar with. It's the CAPS, the Career Ability Placement Survey. Consists of 8 5-minute tests that measure 8 different aptitudes. Results used in conjunction with an interest test and a work values survey to make specific job recommendations. And again, here you'll see that the specific domains or subsets are fairly similar to the other instruments that we discussed: mechanical reasoning, spatial relations, verbal reasoning, numeric ability, language, word knowledge, perceptual speed and accuracy. Kind of on a closing note here, and I think this is a theme that we've probably touched on throughout the course, is how important it is for us to remember as evaluators that when we're using test systems to make recommendations, we don't want to look at assessment results as gospel or the last word. Certainly there are going to be times when assessments point to vocational goals that just aren't an option for your client. It might be because there are no associated goals in the geographical area. It might be because the assessment results just plain don't line up with your client's interests. So what I always like to remember is that the best use of these types of assessments, and really most assessments that we use in rehabilitation counseling, is as a tool for helping clients explore choices and discover for themselves their own strengths, and to get discussions going that are focused on planning for goals. And what's at the center of this type of approach is going to be your clinical judgment. Therefore, we think of assessment and as assessment results not as a kind of material that replaces your clinical authority or your consumer's perspective, but instead as a starting point for investigation and development of ideas. Again, thanks very much, everybody. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.